Finnegan Hawthorne stood frozen on the Timberidge platform, watching the black woman step off the afternoon train with tears streaming down her face. His calloused hands clenched into fists. The entire town had gathered like vultures. This was not supposed to happen. The October wind cut through his wool coat as he watched her stumble on the wooden planks. Her dark traveling dress was fine quality, city-made, too fine for a mountain town where the first snows would arrive within the week. She clutched a torn letter against her chest. Her eyes swept the crowd, searching, desperate. Finn knew that look. He had worn it once. The townspeople pressed closer. Mrs. Henderson whispered behind her gloved hand. The baker's sons pointed. Mayor Cornelius Blackwood emerged from the crowd, his silver watch chain catching the pale sunlight. Finn's stomach dropped to his boots. The woman's knees buckled. She sank onto the platform, her shoulders shaking. The torn letter scattered in pieces around her black button boots. "Where is he?" Her voice carried across the platform, refined, Eastern. "Where is F. Hawthorne?" Finn's throat closed. Every face in the crowd turned toward him. He took a step backward, his boots scraping against the dry wood. This could not be happening. The train's whistle screamed. Steam hissed from the engine like a dying animal. The conductor checked his pocket watch and shook his head. "Ma'am, I need to know if you're staying or going." She lifted her face, beautiful, even streaked with tears, even surrounded by hostile stares. "I don't understand." Her voice broke. "The letters said he would be here." Finn's heart hammered against his ribs. He knew about those letters. His sister Clemency had been showing them to him for weeks, reading passages aloud by lamplight, cheerful descriptions of town life, talk of companionship and mutual respect. He had assumed they were someone else's business. The crowd began to murmur. Words like arrangements and expectations drifted on the wind. Mayor Blackwood straightened his coat and stepped forward. "Miss, perhaps there's been some confusion." The woman struggled to her feet, her chin lifted with dignity that made Finn's chest tighten. "No confusion, sir. I have correspondence from F. Hawthorne of Timberidge. 3 months of letters." Blackwood's pale eyes found Finn across the platform. A smile played at the corners of his mouth, the kind of smile that preceded trouble. "Well now, that's interesting." Finn felt the trap closing around him. He searched the crowd for his sister's face. Clemency stood near the general store, her hand pressed to her mouth. Her complexion had grown paler over recent weeks. The mountain winters were hard on weak lungs. Their eyes met across the platform, guilt written plain as scripture on her features. The pieces fell into place. F. Hawthorne, Finnegan Hawthorne, the letters describing a shopkeeper's life, a man who lived in town, someone seeking companionship after loss. That was not him. That was Clemency's late husband. But his sister had used Finn's name. The woman gathered the scattered letter pieces with shaking hands. Her movements carried grace despite the circumstances. Despite the stares and whispers pressing in from all sides, Finn had never wanted a wife. Any wife. The mountain cabin suited him fine. He had chosen solitude after his last encounter with other people's expectations. After learning what happened when a man like him reached for things beyond his station. Especially not this. Not a black woman in a town where such unions invited the worst kind of attention. But she was crying, and he knew what it meant to be abandoned on a platform while people watched. The conductor's whistle pierced the air again. All aboard heading east. She looked toward the train, then back at the crowd. Her shoulders straightened with resolve that spoke of inner steel. Mayor Blackwood cleared his throat. Perhaps this situation would resolve itself if certain parties were more honest about their intentions. The words carried weight, implication, threat. Finn's jaw tightened. He had lived as a recluse for 8 years, avoiding exactly this kind of public scrutiny. The mountain cabin offered peace, safety. No curious eyes or wagging tongues, but Clemency stepped forward from the crowd. Her face held a desperation that had nothing to do with social embarrassment. "Finn." Her voice barely carried across the platform. "Please." The single word held everything. His sister's failing health, her fear of leaving him alone. her misguided attempt to secure his future happiness. The woman on the platform lifted her chin higher. Tears still tracked down her cheeks, but her spine remained straight. Proud, she would not beg. Finn understood that too. The crowd waited. The train hissed steam. Mayor Blackwood's smile grew wider. Finn's boots scraped against the wooden planks as he stepped forward. Each step felt like walking toward a cliff edge. The townspeople parted before him, their whispers following in his wake. He stopped 3 feet from where she stood, close enough to see the flecks of gold in her dark eyes, close enough to smell the lavender soap she had used that morning, far enough to maintain the pretense of propriety. "Miss," his voice came out rougher than intended. "I'm Finnegan Hawthorne." Her breath caught. She studied his face, taking in the weathered skin and overgrown beard, the wool coat that had seen too many winters, the hands that bore calluses from axe handles and rifle stocks, not what the letters had promised. "You're not a shopkeeper." "No, ma'am." Understanding dawned in her expression, along with something that might have been disappointment or relief. The crowd pressed closer, hungry for drama. Mayor Blackwood stepped between them. "Well then, I suppose that settles matters." But Clemency moved to Finn's side. Her breathing came shallow and quick. The autumn air was too thin for her damaged lungs. "There's been correspondence," she said, "promises made." "By whom?" Blackwood's voice carried silk over steel. "Seems there's been considerable deception involved." The woman's fingers tightened on the letter fragments. Her knuckles stood out pale against her dark skin. Finn found himself speaking before conscious thought formed the words. No deception, just delayed introduction. The lie settled over the platform like fresh snow, quiet, covering everything. But claiming responsibility for his sister's scheme meant claiming responsibility for the woman who stood before him, for her expectations, her future, her safety in a town that did not welcome such arrangements. Mayor Blackwood's eyebrows rose. "How interesting. And what exactly do you propose to do about this situation, Hawthorne?" The question hung in the cold air like a challenge, like a noose. Finn looked at his sister's pleading face, at the woman's proud, tear-streaked features, at the crowd of neighbors who had never much cared for his presence anyway, at Mayor Blackwood's satisfied smile. The train whistle screamed one final warning. "Reckon that's between me and the lady." He extended his arm, not romantic, practical, the gesture of a man accepting burden rather than embracing desire. She stared at his offered elbow for a long moment. The platform fell silent except for the hiss of steam and creak of settling wood. Then she placed her gloved hand on his coat sleeve. Her touch felt like stepping off solid ground. The woman's name was Hera Dunbar. She spoke it with careful pronunciation, each syllable measured against the mountain air. Philadelphia bred, educated, everything the rough timber walls of Henderson's boarding house were not. Finn set her single carpetbag on the narrow bed. The room smelled of old wood and harsh soap, a far cry from whatever life she had left behind. "This is temporary." His words came out harder than intended. "Until we sort things." She nodded without looking at him. Her gloved hand smoothed her traveling dress. The motion spoke of nerves held tightly in check. Clemency lingered in the doorway, her breathing shallow. The walk from the train platform had cost her. Dark circles shadowed her eyes. "The letters described something different," Hera said finally. Clemency's fingers worried the doorframe. "I wrote about my late husband's life. Thomas ran the mercantile, lived above the shop. You used my name. You needed someone." The words fell between them like stones down a well. Finn's jaw tightened. His sister's matchmaking had always been heavy-handed, but this crossed lines even she should have recognized. Hera turned toward the small window. Main Street stretched below, empty now that the train's excitement had passed. A few faces peered from storefront windows, watching. "Why did you leave Philadelphia?" Finn asked. Her shoulders stiffened. The question had found its mark. "A misunderstanding." "What kind?" Silence stretched taut. Outside, the wind rattled glass panes, storm weather approaching from the peaks. "The kind that ruins reputations," she said finally. the kind that follows women who fight back. Finn understood without needing details. Some stories wore themselves into bone and sinew, became part of a person's walking rhythm. He had carried such stories himself. Clemency's cough echoed in the narrow hallway, wet, deep, the sound of lungs losing their war against mountain winters. "How long have you been sick?" Hera's voice carried physician's daughter knowledge. "Since spring." Clemency wiped her mouth with a handkerchief. Dark stains marked the cloth. Hera's expression shifted. Recognition dawned in her dark eyes. Understanding of why desperate measures had seemed reasonable. A dying woman's attempt to secure her brother's future. The boarding house door slammed below. Heavy boots on wooden stairs. Mayor Blackwood's voice carried through the thin walls. "Mrs. Henderson, I trust you understand the delicate nature of our current situation." The landlady's reply came muffled but sharp. Business before politics in her establishment. Finn moved to the window. Blackwood stood in the street below, his silver hair catching afternoon light. Two other men flanked him, town council members, the kind who made decisions for other people's lives. 48 hours, Finn said quietly. "What happens then?" Hera asked. "Council meeting, discussion of moral standards, community values." The words tasted bitter. He had heard such discussions before, watched them destroy what little foothold he had built in regular society. Some lessons carved themselves deep. Hera's reflection appeared beside his in the window glass. Her face held no surprise, no shock at small-town prejudice. She had expected this. That knowledge settled in his chest like winter cold. "I won't burden you," she said. "Find me passage west, California perhaps." "To what?" "Teaching positions exist. Communities that welcome educated women." Her voice carried the brittle quality of plans made in desperation. Routes mapped by necessity rather than desire. Clemency slumped against the doorframe. Her breathing came in short gasps. "The cabin," she whispered. "Take her to the mountain." Finn's hands tightened on the window sill, his refuge. The place he had built after learning the cost of exposure. "It's not suitable for a lady." "I'm not a lady," Hera said. "I'm a woman who needs shelter until spring passage opens." The distinction carried weight. Ladies belonged in parlors and tea services. Women survived whatever circumstances demanded. Below on the street, Blackwood gestured toward the boarding house. His companions nodded. Plans taking shape in afternoon shadows. "The cabin's isolated," Finn said. 20 miles up the mountain. No neighbors, no town conveniences. No watching eyes. No, the single word held promise and warning both. Safety came with a price. Always did. Hera turned from the window. Her movements held decision made and accepted. "When do we leave?" "Dawn." Clemency straightened with effort. "I'll gather supplies, medical necessities." She disappeared down the hallway, her footsteps uneven on warped floorboards, fighting her failing body with stubborn will. Finn found himself alone with the woman his sister's letters had summoned. 3 feet of space stretched between them. Might as well have been 3 counties. "I won't pretend this is what either of us wanted," he said. "No." Her honesty cut clean. No pleasantries or false hopes, just acknowledgement of circumstances neither had chosen. The letters spoke of companionship, mutual respect, Clemency's wishful thinking. Perhaps. She moved to the carpetbag, began unpacking with efficient motions. A few dresses, practical shoes, books wrapped in oiled cloth. The possessions of someone accustomed to carrying her life in small spaces. "I read Whitman," she said without looking up. The admission surprised him. Poetry seemed frivolous for survival situations. And Emerson. Frederick Douglass. Her reading choices painted a picture. Transcendentalism. Abolition. Ideas that challenged accepted order. Dangerous thoughts in the wrong company, or the right company depending on perspective. "The cabin has books," he found himself saying. "What kind?" "Natural philosophy, agricultural texts, some fiction." She nodded as if cataloging information for future reference. Planning already how to occupy isolated winter months. The sun slanted lower through the window. Shadows lengthened across Main Street. Soon the temperature would drop below freezing. Winter's first warning of what lay ahead. I should check supplies, Finn said. Of course. Dismissal without offense. She had tasks of her own, preparation for a life she had never imagined needing. He paused at the door. Hera. She looked up from folding a woolen shawl. This arrangement, it's temporary. I understand. But something in her eyes suggested understanding went deeper than his words intended, that she saw the fear behind his careful distance. Some people carried the ability to see through defensive walls. Finn found that more dangerous than any town council meeting. He left her to her packing and descended to the street. Blackwood had disappeared, but his presence lingered in the way curtains twitched behind windows. In the careful way shopkeepers avoided meeting his eyes. 48 hours to remove a problem before it became everyone's concern. The mountain cabin offered sanctuary, but sanctuary came with its own prices. Isolation bred intimacy whether welcomed or not. Winter stripped away pretense along with everything else unnecessary for survival. By spring, either they would have found a way to coexist, or destroyed each other trying. The cabin sat in a clearing 20 miles from nowhere. Rough-hewn logs chinked with mud and moss. A stone chimney that leaked smoke when the wind shifted wrong. Windows too small for proper light but wide enough for rifle barrels. Finn had built it with his own hands after learning that some kinds of peace required distance. Hera stood beside the loaded wagon, taking measure of her temporary prison. The October cold bit through her wool cloak. Mountain air carried the promise of early snow. It's sturdy, she said. Has to be. He lifted her carpet bag from the wagon bed. Her other possessions fit in a single crate, books mostly, a sewing basket, the accumulated treasures of a life packed in haste. She followed him to the cabin door. Her city boots slipped on frost-slicked ground, caught herself against the doorframe without complaint. Inside, the main room held what survival required. Stone fireplace, wooden table scarred by use, shelves lined with preserving jars and ammunition boxes, a single chair worn smooth by long evenings. Where do I sleep? Finn gestured toward a narrow alcove separated by hanging canvas. Built it for storage. You can make it serve. She pulled aside the canvas, space enough for a bed and wash basin, no window, privacy measured in inches rather than rooms. The privy's out back, he said. Water comes from the creek. Freezes most winters, but I keep an axe for breaking ice. She nodded as if cataloging survival requirements, urban refinement adapting to mountain necessities. Finn busied himself with the fireplace. Kindling caught and flared. Orange light pushed back the shadows gathering in corners. I'll need to teach you things, he said, if you're staying until spring. What things? How to keep the fire alive, load the rifle, read weather signs. She removed her cloak and folded it with precise movements. Beneath, her traveling dress looked out of place against rough timber walls. I learned quickly. You'll have to. The first lesson began immediately. Fire demanded constant attention. Logs needed splitting. Water required hauling from the creek before it froze solid. Hera ruined her good dress the first day. Soot stains and wood splinters marked her efforts. By evening her hands bore fresh blisters from the axe handle. She never complained. Finn found that remarkable. City women in his limited experience wilted under frontier hardships, demanded accommodations the wilderness could not provide. Hera adapted. She learned to bank coals for overnight warmth, how to stretch supplies when storms kept them cabin-bound. The difference between wind that brought weather and wind that merely spoke of restlessness. Her first attempt at cooking over open flame produced charred rabbit and half-raw potatoes. The second try proved edible. By the third, she had discovered how to use cast iron to hold steady heat. You're not what I expected, Finn said one evening. She looked up from mending a torn sleeve. Firelight caught the gold flecks in her dark eyes. What did you expect? Someone who needed constant rescue. I've been rescuing myself for some time. The admission carried weight beyond its simple words. Stories lived in that statement. Struggles he had not witnessed but could recognize. November arrived with the first serious snowfall. 3 days of steady accumulation that erased the path to town. The world beyond the clearing disappeared beneath white uniformity. Isolation settled over them, complete and final. They developed routines born of necessity. Finn checked the trap lines each morning. Hera maintained the cabin. Evenings found them sharing space around the fire, surrounded by books and the quiet sounds of survival. She read aloud sometimes. Her voice carried the cadence of formal education. Stories of distant places where different rules applied. Finn listened from his chair, mending harness leather or cleaning his rifle. The sound filled spaces in the cabin he had not realized were empty. "You have Thoreau," she observed, examining his bookshelf. "Seemed appropriate for mountain living. And Hawthorne, any relation?" "None, I claim." She smiled at that. The first genuine smile he had seen from her. It transformed her face entirely. Dangerous territory. The town made its presence known through Clemency's visits. His sister arrived every 2 weeks, weather permitting. Her condition worsened with each trip. The ride from Timberridge left her exhausted and coughing. "Blackwood's been asking questions," she reported during one December visit. "What kind of questions?" "About your arrangements. Whether they're proper." Finn's hands stilled on the leather he was working. "What did you tell him? That propriety takes different forms in different circumstances." Hera looked up from stirring stew. Her expression held understanding of implications left unspoken. "The town's divided," Clemency continued. "Some think you've done the honorable thing, others question your motives. And Blackwood, he'll make trouble come spring. Council's already discussing community standards." The fire popped and hissed. Outside, wind drove snow against the windows with increasing force. Storm weather approaching. They prepared with practiced efficiency. Extra wood stacked beside the door. Water containers filled before the creek froze solid. Rifle loaded and within reach. The blizzard arrived at midnight. Wind that screamed through timber and turned the world into howling white chaos. By morning, snow reached the cabin windows. The door opened against a wall of white that climbed past Finn's shoulders. "How long?" Hera asked. "Days, maybe a week." She nodded and returned to her tasks. No panic, no demands for impossible rescue. They were trapped together in a space barely large enough for one person's solitude. The storm raged for 4 days. Wind that never ceased. Snow that fell until the world became one endless drift. The cabin shook under winter's assault but held firm. Inside, they moved around each other with careful precision. Space too limited for privacy. Every gesture observed. Every breath shared. Finn found himself watching her hands as she worked. Quick, competent movements that spoke of intelligence adapting to circumstance. She hummed while cooking. Low melodies that wrapped around the cabin's harsh angles. On the third night, she caught him staring. "Is something wrong?" No, but something was changing. The careful distance he maintained required effort now. Her presence had become familiar rather than intrusive. That familiarity led to dangerous territory. "Tell me about Philadelphia," he said. She set down her sewing. Her fingers smoothed the fabric with unconscious grace. "It's loud, full of people who believe their opinions matter more than truth." "Why did you really leave?" The question hung in the fire-lit air. Outside, wind continued its relentless assault on the cabin walls. "A man decided I belonged to him," she said finally. "When I disagreed, he made sure others blamed me for his disappointment." Finn's jaw tightened. The story followed patterns he recognized, power wielded against those with no recourse. "You fought back. I survived." Two different things. He understood the distinction. The storm broke on the fifth morning. Silence fell sudden and complete. No wind, no driving snow, just the vast quiet of winter holding its breath. Finn dug them out with methodical determination. Hours of work to clear a path to daylight. When he finally broke through, clean air rushed into the cabin sharp and cold. Hera stood beside him in the doorway. The world beyond stretched white and unmarked, beautiful in its terrible purity. "It's like being reborn," she said softly. The words carried more meaning than weather observations. They had survived something together, emerged changed by shared ordeal. Finn felt the shift in his chest. Recognition of connection he had not sought but could no longer deny. The woman beside him had proven herself worthy of respect, trust, something deeper than mere accommodation. Winter had carved away pretense, left only what mattered. That realization terrified him more than any blizzard. January thaw arrived unseasonably warm. Ice melted from the cabin eaves in steady drips. The creek ran free for the first time in weeks, its voice clear and urgent through the forest. Hera stood in the doorway watching water carve new channels through snow. The sound spoke of change coming whether welcomed or not. "Ground soft enough," Finn said behind her. "Should teach you proper shooting." She turned from studying the melting world. His hands worked oil into rifle stock, movements sure and practiced. "I know how to shoot." Hitting barn walls isn't the same as putting meat on the table. She followed him to the clearing behind the cabin. He had set tin cans on a fallen log, distance enough to challenge but close enough for success. "Show me your stance." She raised the rifle with careful precision, feet planted, shoulders squared. Everything her father had taught her before Philadelphia became too dangerous for a black woman carrying weapons. The first shot scattered bark 2 inches left of target. "Breathing," Finn said. "You're holding too long." He stepped behind her. His hands covered hers on the rifle stock, solid warmth against her back. "Feel the pause between breaths. Fire then." Her second shot rang the can clean off the log. "Better." His breath stirred the hair at her nape, close enough to feel the steady rhythm of his pulse. Neither moved away immediately. Dangerous ground. They spent the afternoon in the clearing. Her accuracy improved with each round. Finn praised economy of motion, steady nerves, natural eye for distance. "You could hunt small game if needed," he said finally. "Will I need to?" The question carried weight beyond ammunition and targets. Spring meant decisions, departures, the end of arrangements made in winter desperation. "Depends on what you choose." Evening found them working by firelight. Finn carved new handles for worn tools. Hera mended the tears Winter had worn in clothing and equipment. Her humming filled the cabin's rough corners, melodies that softened edges and made the space feel less like survival shelter. "Where did you learn those songs?" he asked. "My mother. Before she died." "How old were you?" 14. The needle paused in her fingers, memory casting shadows across her face. "Consumption took her, left me with relatives who considered me burden rather than family." Finn understood burden, the weight of being unwanted, tolerated only until circumstances changed. "Is that when you learned to rescue yourself?" "That's when I learned no one else would." Truth settled between them stark and clean. They had both survived abandonment, found ways to build walls strong enough to keep the world at manageable distance. Yet somehow Winter had worn those walls thin. "I was engaged once," Finn said suddenly. Hera's hand stilled on the mending. The admission surprised them both. "What happened?" "Her family discovered my grandmother was Cherokee, decided their daughter deserved better than a half-breed mountain man." The words came easier than expected. Old pain worn smooth by years of carrying it alone. "They destroyed my business, spread stories about savage blood and untrustworthiness, made sure no respectable woman would look twice. So you came here. Built this place with my own hands. Figured solitude was safer than disappointment." Hera set down her sewing. Firelight caught the angles of her face, casting shadows that spoke of understanding earned through similar wounds. "I'm sorry. Long time ago. Pain doesn't respect time." The observation cut deeper than comfort. She saw through his careful distance to the hurt still carried beneath. Some people possess that dangerous gift. February brought Clemency's last visit. She arrived slumped over her horse's neck, barely conscious from the ride up the mountain. Her breathing came in shallow gasps that spoke of organs failing. Hera helped her into the cabin, gentle hands that knew how to tend the dying. "The town's talking," Clemency whispered. "Spring plans, What happens when the pass is clear? Finn knelt beside the makeshift bed they had prepared. His sister's face looked transparent. Skin stretched thin over sharp bones. Don't worry about town business. Blackwood's gathering support. Council meeting planned for May. She pressed a letter into Hera's hands. The paper felt thin as bird bone. From California. Teaching position in Sacramento. Colored community there. Good wages. Hera stared at the envelope. Escape offered when she had not known she needed rescuing. They want educated women, Clemency continued. Someone who can build school programs. When do they need an answer? Spring, before travel season ends. The letter disappeared into Hera's skirt pocket. Finn watched its concealment with something that might have been disappointment or relief. Clemency stayed 3 days. Her cough worsened each night. Blood spotted the handkerchief she tried to hide. On the final morning, she pulled Finn aside while Hera tended the fire. She loves you. The words hit harder than expected. Finn's hands stilled on the harness he was mending. You're imagining things. I'm dying. That clarifies vision. He looked toward the cabin where Hera's silhouette moved against lamplight. Grace in motion, purpose in every gesture. Doesn't matter what she feels. Why not? Look at her, educated, refined. She could build a real life in California. What about your life? This isn't living. It's hiding. Clemency's laugh turned into a coughing fit. When it passed, her eyes held fierce determination. Then stop hiding. She died 2 weeks later. Finn found the note she had left behind, pressed between pages of his Bible. The truth about the letters, about her schemes and desperate hopes, about watching him waste years in self-imposed exile, about believing love was worth fighting for. The letter from California remained unopened in Hera's possession, but Finn felt its presence in every silence, every careful distance she maintained. March brought new correspondence, multiple offers of employment, teaching positions in Colorado mining towns, domestic work in Denver households that valued discretion over prejudice, escape routes multiplying as winter loosened its grip. You have choices, Finn said one evening. Hera looked up from writing responses to potential employers. Her pen paused above paper. Yes, good ones, places that would value your abilities. So it seems. The conversation felt like negotiating around a chasm, each word chosen for safety rather than truth. When the pass is clear, I could escort you to Denver. Make sure you reach your destination safely. That's considerate, polite distance, careful courtesy. Everything winter had taught them to abandon now returning with spring's approach. That night Finn lay awake listening to her breathing beyond the canvas partition. Regular rhythm that had become as familiar as his own heartbeat. In 2 months, silence would fill that space again. The thought sat in his chest like a stone. Morning brought the sound of ice cracking in the creek, winter's final surrender to inevitability, change arriving whether welcomed or not. Hera stood at the window watching water run free. Her reflection caught in glass looked thoughtful, sad. The thaw's early this year, she said. Few more weeks and travel will be possible. Yes. The single word carried everything they refused to speak. Spring meant separation. Return to lives that had never included each other. But her hand rested against the window glass with reluctance that spoke of attachments formed in isolation. Bonds that solitude had made possible. Finn found himself standing close enough to see her pulse flutter at her throat, close enough to smell the lavender soap she saved for special occasions, close enough to step forward or step away. The choice balanced on winter's edge, waiting for spring to tip the balance. The federal marshal arrived with April mud still clinging to his boots, badge gleaming against a travel-stained coat, eyes that measured everything for potential violation of territorial law. Marshal Crawford had ridden 20 miles at Mayor Blackwood's invitation. Official business regarding moral standards and community values. Finn watched from the cabin doorway as the 2 men approached through morning mist. Their horses picked careful paths between melting snow patches. Hawthorne. Crawford's voice carried authority worn smooth by years of frontier justice. We need to discuss your living arrangements. Hera appeared beside Finn in the doorway. Her presence there spoke volumes. No hiding, no shame, two adults facing whatever judgment approached. What arrangements? Finn asked. Cohabitation without benefit of marriage. Reports of improper conduct. Blackwood smiled from his saddle. Victory anticipated before battle joined. Who's making reports? Concerned citizens, people who value moral order. The marshal dismounted with practiced efficiency. His gaze swept the cabin's exterior. Single dwelling, two occupants, conclusions drawn from architecture and assumption. Miss, I need to hear your side of this situation. Hera stepped forward. Her chin lifted with dignity that refused intimidation. I'm a guest in Mr. Hawthorne's home. Nothing improper has occurred. Guests don't stay through entire winters. This one did. Truth delivered without elaboration. No excuses or lengthy explanations. Simple facts stated plainly. Crawford studied her face for signs of deception, found only calm certainty. The town's concerned about appearances. Territorial law requires certain standards be maintained. What standards? Finn asked. Those that distinguish civilization from wilderness. Blackwood's smile widened. Legal authority backing moral prejudice created powerful ammunition. I see no violation here, Finn said carefully. Two people sharing shelter during harsh weather, nothing more. The lie tasted bitter. Months of growing attachment reduced to mere convenience. Feelings that had taken root in winter silence denied for legal protection. Crawford's eyes shifted between them. Professional skepticism weighing testimony against assumption. You're saying there's no romantic involvement, no improper intimacy. None. The word cut deeper than intended. Finn felt Hera's stillness beside him, heard the sharp intake of breath she tried to suppress, public denial of private truth. Necessary for her safety but devastating nonetheless. Well then, Crawford relaxed slightly. If that's the case, I suppose the matter resolves itself when the lady departs. When's that happening? Blackwood pressed. Hera reached into her skirt pocket, drew out an envelope bearing California postmarks. I've accepted a teaching position in Sacramento. Travel arrangements are being finalized. Her voice carried steady professionalism. No hint of the emotion that had flickered across her face moments before. Excellent. Blackwood's satisfaction was evident. Problem solved without need for further intervention. Crawford nodded and turned back toward his horse. Official business concluded to everyone's satisfaction, except for the two people whose lives hung in the balance. The men rode away through melting snow. Their horses' hoofprints filled quickly with muddy water, evidence of their visit dissolving into spring earth. Finn and Hera stood in the doorway until the sound of hooves faded completely. Silence stretched between them thick with unspoken words. You accepted the position, he said finally. Yes. When do you leave? 2 weeks. Travel season opens early this year. She turned back into the cabin. Her movements held careful control. Emotions held in check through sheer will. Finn followed but kept distance. The space between them felt charged with things neither dared acknowledge. It's a good opportunity, he said. So I'm told. Educated women are valued in California. Progressive communities. Yes. Each word fell like stones in still water, ripples of meaning spreading outward from simple statements. You'll have a real life there, purpose beyond mere survival. She paused in folding clothes. Her hands pressed flat against worn fabric. And what will you have? The question caught him unprepared, turned his careful encouragement back on itself. What I've always had, peace. Solitude. Is that enough? Honesty would have required confession. Admission that months of shared space had ruined him for absolute isolation, that her voice reading aloud had filled silences he had not known were empty. Instead he chose safety. It has to be. The next 2 weeks passed in careful preparation. Hera organized her possessions with methodical precision, books wrapped in oiled cloth, clothes packed in travel order, every item considered for usefulness in unknown circumstances. Finn maintained hunting and trapping routines. normal patterns that provided excuse for absence. Time away from the cabin's increasingly strained atmosphere. They moved around each other with elaborate courtesy. Please and thank you scattered through conversations like broken glass. Politeness covering wounds too deep for casual healing. He found the letter by accident, fallen behind the wooden crate she used for storage. Paper worn soft from repeated handling. His name written in her careful script. Words he was never meant to see. The truth laid bare in ink and honesty. Feelings that winter isolation had nurtured. Love acknowledged in private while publicly denied. Everything he had suspected but feared to hope. Everything that made her leaving both necessary and unbearable. He placed the letter back where she had dropped it. Some truths were too dangerous for acknowledgement. Some feelings too fragile for exposure to daylight. The night before her departure, they sat by the fire in familiar silence. Her packing completed, his preparations for solitary life resumed. "I'll miss this," she said quietly. "The mountains, the quiet, the way evening settles here. Not the cabin, not him. The place itself and its peculiar peace. California has beautiful country too. I'm sure it does." Her voice carried resignation rather than anticipation, duty accepted rather than adventure embraced. "Hera." She looked up from the book she was not reading. "This arrangement, these months, they weren't what either of us planned. No, but they weren't entirely unwelcome either. The admission cost him more than expected. Crack in defensive walls built over years of careful isolation. No, she agreed softly. Not entirely unwelcome. They stared into the fire rather than at each other, flames dancing over split wood with hypnotic rhythm. "In different circumstances," he began, then stopped. "Yes." She understood without need for completion. Different world, different rules, different possibilities for people like them. But they lived in this world, under these rules, with these limitations. Morning arrived gray and cold. Late spring storm threatening from the western peaks. Travel weather that promised difficulty but could not be delayed. The wagon waited in the clearing, her possessions loaded with careful attention to weight distribution. Everything she owned reduced to manageable burden. Finn helped her into the seat, his hands steady despite the tremor in his chest, professional courtesy masking personal devastation. "Ready?" she nodded without speaking, hands folded in her lap with rigid composure. The ride to town passed in silence, wheels finding ruts carved by countless previous journeys, path worn smooth by other people's departures. At the train station, he lifted her bags onto the platform, careful not to let their hands touch during the transfer. The westbound train appeared on schedule, black smoke against gray sky, steam and iron carrying people toward futures they could not imagine. "This is goodbye then," she said. "Safe travels." She boarded without looking back, found a window seat that faced away from the platform, deliberate choice to avoid prolonged farewell. The train pulled away with mechanical precision, smoke and steam dissipating into mountain air. Finn stood on the empty platform until the sound faded completely, until even the memory of wheels on rails became silence. Then he climbed back into his wagon and began the 20-mile journey home, to a cabin that would echo with ghosts, to solitude that no longer felt like sanctuary, to the life he had chosen over the love he had denied. The cabin felt hollowed out, empty spaces where her voice had lived, corners that remembered her humming, firelight that fell on one chair instead of two. Finn lasted 3 days. On the 4th morning, he saddled his horse and rode toward town with desperate purpose. The letter she had dropped burned in his shirt pocket, words that proved everything he had been too afraid to believe. The westbound train departed at noon. If he pushed hard, if the mountain passes cooperated, he might reach the station before the wheels carried her beyond retrieval. Might was a slim foundation for hope, but it was all he possessed. The horse's hooves struck stone and earth in steady rhythm, miles disappearing beneath determination finally unleashed. 8 years of hiding dissolved in the face of loss too great to accept. Some things were worth the risk of destruction. The train station came into view through morning haze, black smoke rising from the engine, steam hissing as the conductor prepared for departure. Finn dismounted at a run. His boots hit the platform hard as the final boarding call echoed through mountain air. She sat by a window in the last car, profile turned toward glass, watching the town she was leaving forever. He found her just as the train lurched into motion. Hera. She turned at the sound of her name. Shock replaced resignation on her face. Finn, what are you doing here? The train picked up speed, wheels finding their rhythm on steel rails, decision time measured in seconds rather than minutes. Don't go. The words escaped before conscious thought could stop them. Raw truth offered without calculation or protection. What? Don't go to California, stay here with me. Other passengers stared, curious faces pressed to windows, drama unfolding for public consumption. You told the marshal there was nothing between us. I lied. The admission cost everything. Safety, reputation, the careful distance he had maintained for 8 years of self-imposed exile, to protect you from legal consequences, not because it was true. The train gathered momentum. Station platform sliding past with increasing speed. I found your letter, he continued. The one you dropped, the words you wrote but never sent. Her hand rose to her throat, understanding and embarrassment warring in her expression. You weren't meant to see that. I know, but I did, and it changed everything. The conductor appeared in the aisle, official concern about disruptions to passenger comfort. Sir, you need to either board or step away from the train. Finn looked at Hera. Everything balanced on her choice, her willingness to risk the safety California promised for the uncertainty he offered. Come with me, she said suddenly. California welcomes people who want fresh starts. No, the word surprised them both. I'm done running, done hiding from what other people think. He extended his hand toward her. If we're going to build something together, we build it honest, in the open. The town will never accept us. Then we'll find one that will. Or we'll make our own rules. The train whistle screamed. Last warning before departure became irreversible. She stared at his outstretched hand. 5 months of shared winter. 2 people who had found something worth fighting for despite impossible circumstances. Sir. The conductor's voice carried final authority. Board or disembark. Now. Hera gathered her traveling bag, rose from her seat with decision made. She took his hand. They stepped off the train together as it pulled away toward California and the safe life she was abandoning. Steam and smoke dissipated into mountain air, opportunity disappearing into distance, but her fingers remained intertwined with his, warm and certain despite the stares of townspeople who had gathered to witness the spectacle. Mayor Blackwood pushed through the crowd, his face red with indignation and frustrated authority. This is highly irregular. The arrangements were settled. Arrangements change, Finn said, not these arrangements. The council has standards to maintain. Then maintain them somewhere else. The challenge hung in the air between them. Public confrontation Finn had avoided for 8 years finally unavoidable. You can't simply flout community values. Watch me. But other voices rose from the crowd. Mrs. Henderson from the boarding house stepped forward. Community values include treating people with decency. Something you've forgotten, Cornelius. The baker nodded agreement. Man has a right to choose his own path. Not universal support, but enough to shift the balance. Enough to prove the town was not monolithic in its prejudices. Blackwood's smile faltered, political calculation replacing moral outrage. This matter isn't finished. Yes, it is. Finn turned away from the mayor's threats, led Hera toward his waiting horse with steps that carried no apology. Where are we going? She asked. Colorado, mining country, place called Silver Creek that welcomes people willing to work hard and mind their own business. You've been planning this. For about 10 minutes, she laughed. The sound carried joy mixed with terror of the unknown. Adventure chosen over security. Love chosen over fear. They rode out of Timberidge together. 2 people whose correspondence had begun in deception but found truth in winter isolation. Behind them, the town watched their departure with mixed emotions. Some shook their heads in disapproval. Others smiled with quiet satisfaction. Change never arrived gently. The mountain road stretched ahead through pine forest and granite peaks. Uncertain path toward uncertain future. But they traveled it together, and that made all the difference. Silver Creek welcomed them without questions about their past. Mining communities measured worth in contribution rather than conformity. Two capable adults willing to work found acceptance regardless of the social complications they brought. Finn established a trading post that served scattered settlements. Hera taught school for miners, children hungry for education. They built a life that honored both their strengths. They married in a simple ceremony witnessed by friends who had learned to judge character over appearances. Community formed around shared struggles rather than shared prejudices. The cabin in the mountains remained empty for a season. Then other people found it, used it for shelter during harsh weather, the cycle continuing as it always had. Some places existed to harbor those who needed refuge, to protect people until they found strength to face the world again. Others were meant for building, for putting down roots in soil that welcomed growth. Finn and Hera had learned the difference. On evenings when work was finished and the day's heat gave way to mountain coolness, they sat together watching sunset paint the peaks with gold and crimson, her hand resting in his voice joining hers in the songs she remembered from childhood. The correspondence that had brought them together lived in a wooden box on their mantel, letters written in desperation and hope, words that had created connection across impossible distance. Sometimes they read them aloud by lamplight, reminded themselves how far they had traveled from those first desperate exchanges to this place of chosen love. Winter would come again. Spring would follow. The cycle of seasons that governed mountain life would continue its eternal rhythm, but they would face it together. Two people who had learned that the greatest risks sometimes yielded the greatest rewards. That love found in unlikely circumstances could prove more durable than safety sought in familiar places. The mountains held their story now, another tale of people who had found each other against impossible odds. The land remembered such stories, kept them safe in stone and timber and the endless conversation between wind and sky. And that is all to the story for now. Please let me know where you are tuning in from. Perhaps we will create a story there. Consider liking this video and subscribing to our channel. And if you enjoy our content, click this video on your screen. I promise you it's worth watching. See you tomorrow.